It's September the 15th, 2022. I'm your host, Dana Durnford. I'm also known as the Nuclear Proctologist.org, and you can call in at 709-589-4406. Does that look like bird flu to anybody? Some hard cases, eh? I think the snow crabs died of bird flu, though, in Alaska. Probably had nothing to do with Fukushima radioactive fallout. It's really interesting because nobody's willing to have any conversation about these models that they created. It's not that complicated if you're honest. What do I say? So that was last night. I took the small tent instead of the big tent, which was a mistake, as you'll learn later. That was this morning. The fog was so thick, you actually had to cut it with a knife. And then we got some videos of that. It'll probably change your world and version of. So we're going to cover, we'll talk about whatever, but we got a lot of news stories we got to cover. And we'll kind of, now I blew out my hip since I went out there. I had the small tent, so I didn't take a chair with me, which was a serious, fatal mistake for me. And I'm too old and too decrepit to be able to sit on the ground, I guess, is to the point where I had to lie down every 3 or 4 hours. Even if I was one time I laid down about right there on the ground because it was so painful. And that took the pressure off. But sitting on the quad didn't take the pressure off for some reason. It was only lying down, and you had to do it right away. And so I was in so much pain. I'm heartbroken. How many insects does it take to feed baby birds? It's a lot. So this is important. So 61 nests consumed over 5 million insects. So 61 nests raised their little fledglings, their little baby birdies, and that's over, say, 22 days. And out of the 61 nests, they counted, university students had counted over 5 million insects that was fed to the baby birds in 22 days in 61 nests. Like, if you know anything about typical bird populations, 61 nests is not very many, right? So we just came back from an expedition, a short one at that, where we covered 100 kilometers off-road and set up in the middle of nowhere. And I posted a video yesterday, about a 9-minute video. It was just flat silence. Surreal. There was some insects, and but it wasn't like enough to feed 61 nests or anything. If there were 61 nests around there, they would have starved to death. So, walk backwards to April. April here on the east coast of Canada, there was a mass die-off of 4 species. There was a common murre, the common turd, thick-billed turd, and dovekites. And so the first 3 eat anchovies, squid, sardines, and krill, and capelin, whatever, small fish, right? But the dovekites eat microscopic animals. So it was two different spectrums of the food chain had showed up emaciated at the same time. Now, a couple of months ahead, all of a sudden, all the die-offs are being blamed on bird flu. Without the actual evidence to prove it was the bird flu, they were waiting for the evidence to come back. So I'll kind of give you a quick go at what I mean by that from previous headlines over the last couple of months to get you up to speed. So it was around 600 kilometers of the coastline. We went down there and investigated it. In tiny budget. We talked to every gas station, every convenience shop in these little tiny communities because that's the meeting place, right? And that's where all the gossip and rumors and weddings and babies and everything is talked about. In every community, each day was hundreds of these birds were washing up and they were emaciated along 600 kilometers of the coastline. The official story was that there was ice pack 200 kilometers thick off the coastline, and the birds couldn't make it into the coastline to get food. But the birds were actually headed to the Arctic, not to Newfoundland and Labrador. They showed up and there wasn't 200 kilometers ice. At best, if the wind was blowing on shore, it was maybe a kilometer thick of ice when it packed up. And the wind will pack it up, right? And it's the Atlantic, by the way. So Fukushima was in the Pacific. So a lot of people can't wrap their mind around how the radiation affected the Atlantic. And that's okay. That's what I'm here for, I guess, because common sense is not the most common thing anymore. This is France's model of the airborne radioactive fallout. Airborne. I can spell it for you, but I'm assuming you know how to spell airborne. That's a ferocious looking plume, right? Well, this is the Atlantic. That's Europe. That's the Pacific. Now, we've done research expeditions up from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska for 6 years. For 4 to 5 months you're on the ocean. The Atlantic was pummeled by radioactive fallout. It was pummeled. The entire... Now, this model is 16 days. So 16 days later, you have a continuous plume covered. Think of it if you had a snowstorm that looked like that. And the snow never melted. Well, radiation's the same thing, except you can't see it or smell it or taste it or hear it or feel it or touch it or pick it up or whatever. But insects are very vulnerable. Birds are very, very vulnerable, etc., etc. Okay. We're getting there. So this is the headline from 2 days ago. Bird flu now this is BBC, the biggest media in the United Kingdom, the official government media in the United Kingdom. And this is a picture of the bird they're showing you, which is an emaciated bird typically when you look at that. So that's these two pictures are extraordinary. Why would you... Like, the bird flu would long since, the virus would long since, if it was there, it would have died. Okay, hang on. So another story on a Dublin beach in the United Kingdom, I kind of cut off it, done the same thing. But he found 9 birds that were dead quite a while. Let's put it that way. And bird flu. And so this is an extraordinary picture, but it's extraordinary because you had 2 different medias, one massive, sneaking that picture out with no debate whatsoever, no conversation. Don't touch the emaciated birds, which are, I'm sorry, bird flu. Birds were falling from the sky due to the illness, or like we've seen from hunger, where we've seen millions starving to death. To find that and suggest that is their evidence is the kookiest thing imaginable. We're waiting for clarification on what to do and how to handle it. So they don't understand the very basis of it. Nothing. But they're coming out and making this assertion they died from the bird flu, despite the fact that the birds... It's such a ludicrous stretch. Okay, hang on. So another headline from the day is a dolphin and a porpoise met at a bar, and the dolphin said to the porpoise, no, just kidding. A dolphin and a porpoise are dead after catching the bird flu. Now, of course, there's only 2 reports in the world of bird flu and porpoise, or mammals, right? Porpoise, dolphins, and the first case was a porpoise, where it was confirmed. A porpoise. In the middle of nowhere, they checked it for bird flu, and sure enough, it was bird flu. I think that's why all the trees are dying also, because of bird flu. Avian flu detected. You'll see where I'm going with this real shortly. Bear with me. Avian flu detected in Utah foxes. The first mammal case in United States history. These headlines were showing up at the same time as the United Kingdom was claiming, at the exact same time, I should say, that the bird flu was killing all the birds over there, which were normally just dying of starvation, were emaciated. Now, we're dying of the bird flu. And it jumped the foxes, it jumped the baby raccoons, the first time ever, and harbor seals, and rocks, and goose, and bald eagles. To save the birds, should we kill off cats at the same time? The ducks in a reflecting pool in the middle of a city, in the middle of nowhere. Sure enough, bird flu all at the same time, right? These were all at the same time within a short week and a half period. And then it went silent again. Bird flu detected in a red fox and eagle. Bird flu don't get it. Climate change will kill them for sure. Changing the DNA of the birds. Are birds of prey to blame for farmland bird decline? That was a departure from the norm, wasn't it? But to kind of blame them for the decline, then the birds of prey would have to be responsible for it right across the entire planet, basically. Right? And so you got stuff like that being thrown into the mix to confuse everybody. Then we had the reports in, where's the date on that? We had the reports that hundreds of gannets were found sick and dead on PEI. There's no colonies in PEI. They have no reason to actually be in PEI. The only reason they would end up in PEI and would be if they couldn't find food. That would be desperation, like we see with quite a few species showing up in Montreal. So far from the ocean, you couldn't see it from the top of any mountain with the best telescopes on the planet. Thousands of Gulf of St. Lawrence seabirds likely. This is an opinion. This is a conjecture. They're just as likely to die of starvation. If they're likely to die of bird flu, they're just as likely to be starvation. Then you have sandwich terns. Colony wiped out. Now, a lot of these have one thing in common. They eat the same species. Same with the puffins. Iconic puffins at risk from the deadly bird flu spreading around the coast. Now, over the last 11 years, these die-offs of all mass die-offs just steamrolling have been attributed to starvation. Not just birds, but the influenza is felling wild mammals. What? Goats and elephants and alligators. What? Climate change is causing mass die-off of animals. Here's what climate change actually is. We get 80-something years of radioactive fallout. Gas, oil, and coal emissions don't make plumes covering the planet. This is a great one because it's a 16-day model from France's government. So gas, oil, and coal emissions don't do that. That's nuclear meltdown in Japan. It's covering the whole planet with perpetual emissions, heat energy producers. So the radioactive invisible plume is pulsing energy at the speed of light every second, every atom. And this was the same energy normally would power hundreds of millions of homes when you compile the actual numbers, right? This is pulsing energy every second. Now, almost at the speed of light. You got gammas and alphas and neutrons and betas, and when they pulse and hit each other, they create another brutal effect known as X-rays, because these different emitters don't mingle. They don't interlace. They hit each other almost at the speed of light and change direction and creates this powerful effect known as an X-ray, a full body X-rays for insects and birds and animals and mammals and everything else. Okay, now let me just flick through some of this again. The porpoise and the dolphins and the avian flu raccoons and Quebec harbor seals and the list goes on. Right? We had this was the original steamroll that they hit you with, but in the middle of all of these die-offs, there was a place that had similar die-offs, but they done something different. They done their own test. They stepped outside the box. Starvation caused mass bird deaths that was blamed on at the exact same time as avian flu. Instead of sending it to the government agency, they done the test themselves. They paid for it themselves. So seagulls, ducks, terns, cormorants have been confirmed to die from starvation. Not the original announcement of suspected, which is the state, by the way, of highly pathogen avian flu. It wasn't. It was starvation. But everything else all around them was dying of the avian flu, Dana. No. You're being hoodwinked. No highly pathogenic avian influenza was found, and it confirmed that the state labeled the dead birds they examined as emaciated. All were emaciated. The consensus is that they died of starvation. Okay, here we go. Okay, so we done research expeditions after Fukushima for 6 years, from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska. I'm going to show you pictures of what it should look like pre-Fukushima, and then I'll show you the post-Fukushima combination. So this is what the entire Pacific coastline normally would look like. And it looked like this for millions and millions of years. Everything was saturated with this incredible diversity, this incredible, brilliant colors, right? So you can see them incredible, just unbelievable amount of food in this stuff here. It's just so the birds could land anywhere and get an incredible amount of food on the drop of a hat. There was no way to starve to death. This is what the entire coastline would normally look like, right from California all the way to Alaska. It's just an absurd amount of food. So wherever you went ashore, it should look like to your left, not like your right. Because that's what it looks like now to your right. And so we'd done the research expeditions year after year. The species didn't come back. The species didn't come back. So the pictures to your right are the after Fukushima. The pictures to your left are pre-Fukushima. So the radioactive plume pounded that coastline immediately and continuously. Okay, so let's get into the news. The birds would normally land anywhere and be able to get food. There was no reason for them to starve to death, right? Now, before I forget, Monday, I think it was Monday or Tuesday, I ordered the idler control valve from the dealership, and it's in stock. So we'll have it early next week, 7 to 10 days. And so we'll have the boat ready to go next week. And we already got lots of fuel on it. So that's some kind of good news to have out there for a change. And we'll get back out on the water next week. This is what I'll be showing you again.
Up there.
If everything else goes according to plan.
Windows today. Meant to do that this morning. There's a big.
So we'll be out looking for the dead birds next week. If fewer dead bugs on your windshield is actually a bad sign for insects. Now at the beginning of it, we just went out and had a kick at the can, and I blew out my hip because I was stupid and didn't take the big tent and the proper chairs so I can rest in, because I'm not very healthy, right? And I shouldn't be doing any of this, period. I'm not healthy enough to be doing it. I already suffered enough from the research expeditions back and forth to Alaska. But nobody's going to do it. We got no choice but to get it done. And so me going out there for the last number of days was desperation. And out in the middle of nowhere, spent 3 days, almost 3 days, and you would starve to death out there. We'll talk about more about that on Sunday night show when I get a chance to organize everything, because now once I got home and got onto the chair, that gave me the relief I needed. So I'm doing much better. Now I might head back out. I never unpacked everything or nothing. The intention is to take a break, grab the big tent, and go back out. But that's nutty. I got to be into the cancer doctor next week, right? And I was gonna cancel that, but we also got bad weather coming next week too, and so I'm just tortured because there's no spiders in our forest. I needed to get out there and see it for myself and verify it. Otherwise, we can't say. It'd be nice if they were there. It should be close to 500,000 per acre. Now, last night, I found some spider strands, and I couldn't figure it out because there was just this little section of dead trees, right, where I found the spider strands. It was like Spider-Man going from branch to branch. It wasn't like a web or something. And that was just as the sun was setting down. And I got a video of that. I'll play that on Sunday night. But what was unusual about it, I couldn't wrap my mind around why was I seeing it on dead trees but not on live trees? Not that there was any spider webs, but there was strands, right? Really thin strands. And it struck me that the dead tree is not sucking up nutrition and water, right? And that's why we're not seeing spiders tying on to trees and plants. And researcher told us last year when I was out on the expedition, a bunch of them came along on their quads and took a break where I was too. And he was telling me there's no spiders in Nova Scotia, right? And they were studying spiders on hemlock trees up there because they never ever had a problem with the hemlock trees, but they're gone from everywhere else. So it was like bizarreness as it gets. So fewer dead bugs on your windshield. In 2015, we noticed that the 30,000 insects at the high tide lines in the Pacific, British Columbia coastline, because there's 27,000 islands up there. We've done it for 6 years, up to 4, 5, 6 months at a time without coming home on the ocean looking for the species. And so, we really done a great job on getting the documentation. And it was totally exterminated. That was due to Fukushima. So they decided to cover it up. And glaciers were missing right through the entire Cascades. And they won't even acknowledge it today. It's like, how can you get snowpack in the winter? Now there's no more glaciers. And they just switched gears like it doesn't even exist. And the same with the documentation, they wouldn't acknowledge. Despite the fact that I had around 15 academic journals contacted me and wanted me to publish it in their journals, this was an open publish already at my site. All right, that was the idea, and it's still there now. The idea was, you're not going to go do the research expeditions. I do it, put it all up at my site, and it's free for everybody. You can make documentaries out of it. If you got any issues, I'll sign off on it. And you can tell the story, right? But you can have the documentation. And lots of people grabbed the documentation, but they didn't tell the story. So to a serious worldwide decline in insect population. Let's go back and get running through these stories. Points to a serious worldwide decline. Worldwide is exactly the same place where Fukushima radioactive fallout happened to land. That's quite the coincidence, Dana. I know. So the Weather Network had drove through a mayfly explosion of insects. And that's all you see on these lights is mayflies, no other species, just mayflies. But normally your windshields, you would have to clean your windshields regularly because of insects. Not like once a year, but regularly, and your headlights included. If you were driving 400 miles, you might have to stop twice, pre-Fukushima. Because they're the most vulnerable, right? A lot of radiation just hovers right off the ground, and it can pulse energy 40, 50 feet, some of it, every second. So we sterilize the forest, the bacteria, the fungus. So you won't see none of these insects. Well, I've seen 5 butterflies in 3 days. I'm just sick to my guts because it's been such a tough year. Breakdown after breakdown after breakdown. And we had to do everything the hard way, unfortunately, which is fine. We got it done. I still got a problem, though, and it's I'm going to have to get at it the weekend and isolate it and figure what the frig is going on. Because there's a lot of squealing going on. It's just, I can't be lugging a boat all over the coastline. They're showing you ticks. Look at the bastards. What are they showing you that for? There's so many other species of insects that'll hit your windshield. Ticks are the last one you're worried about. In fact, they're probably the last ones to go. They talk about climate change and they show you these pictures, blah, 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 blah. And they suggest that you start growing food for insects in your gardens, which is never going to be a bad idea, of course. Global decline in insect population. Which now the windshield phenomenon, we had truck drivers calling in 2015, 16, and 17 from all over North America, talking about how they just drove across the country and didn't have to clean their windshields. They were freaked out by it. We had farmers calling in and emailing us, talking about, I know there's one guy in particular called in and he said he thought I was full of shit. So he went out, because he's been farming in this spot for like 30 years. So he went out where he knew all the insects would be and he started tearing apart stuff where they should be and he couldn't find them and it freaked him out. And he started paying attention to his porch light, like I suggested people do. And we had covered hundreds and hundreds of kilometers of thick forest and we didn't find the insects. We were checking big Winnebagos, big motorhomes were coming through, like Cathedral Grove and places like that in Western Canada, which were notorious insect areas. And they didn't have any issues with their windshields. We checked the front of their vehicles and there's little smatters, but there wasn't. And so over the next couple of years, we started realizing, wait a second. So on the expeditions along the coastline, I showed you that stuff earlier, the high tide line would have 30,000 insects. And the forests were silent up there too on top of that. They were gone. In the UK, the Kent Wildlife Trust and Bug Life are running a citizen science project to tackle the question. I hate these types of people, by the way. They said conclusions are concerning showing 71% decline in the number of insects, and the other one was a 75% decline in insect biomass. Insects also keep each other in check. One species disappearing can open the way to a more damaging one. Now, what the insects I've seen wouldn't feed a single nest of birds, let alone a bunch of nests. And hello. Yeah. Yep. Okay, Mike, you calling in? You want to get on the radio? Okay, hang on there. That's Michael Schill calling in. You've seen him in the comments section sometimes, folk.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Maybe,
Mike.
If I'm drunk, I post too many times.
Yeah, that happens. We get drunks in here on a regular basis.
Well, we're still smart.
No, that's right, yeah. I used to drink years and years ago. Hi, Mike. How are you, sir?
I'm well, sir. And I just want to say from this side of the counter, we really appreciate what you're doing. And there are other people on YouTube who are also starting to clue into what you're talking about. And so I just want to say thank you. And
You're welcome, sir. Thank you. And
all right, well, have a good night.
Okay, well, okay. Good stuff, my friend. Thank you. Good night, Mike. Mitchell and Michael. I'll get it right. Okay. So one final suggestion was talk about it with your loved ones or your elected officials. Make them understand the insect diversity is important for your well-being, which is, we do this all the time, right? It's like we don't even exist. The documentation that I bring to the table, when you bring it together and you look at the big picture, which is what we do. When I say we, I mean me. So Newfoundland, Point Land's dealing with Portuguese man-o'-war swarm and dead birds. Now, the Portuguese man-o'-war, we would get it on our hook and line year-round. It's normal. I dealt with it year after year after year after year after year on the ocean. We used to pull hook and line out of the ocean all day, right? And gill nets, we'd get it in the gill nets, and it would sting. Like, you'd always have a 5-gallon bucket of water there, and you dip one hand, hang on to the gear, and dip your other hand, because you couldn't let it go because of the hydraulics. It would drop off, right? But they're claiming that somebody there was claiming that they've never seen them. Parts of the beach is littered with dead seabirds, which is what we wanted to go down and check out, but we had the tail end of a hurricane come through, and there's just there's going to be the seas down there were going to be ferocious. It was pointless. And unusual number of foreign sea creatures. Now the wind is, we're going to have a blow for the next 3 or 4 days, and then the wind's going to drop down to 12, 14 kilometers. Now, it's blown from the north for the last 5 days or something. It just changed. I think it's blown from the west or something. An unusual number of foreign sea creatures. So Point Lance is across from where I'm to. It's on the other side of the peninsula. And so I talked about this earlier. We don't know of a higher body count for Newfoundland. It wasn't a mysterious seabird's death. They were starved to death. Right, this is where they started to spin the story, was right there. They started omitting the original reports that the birds were all emaciated. And that was around 600 kilometers of the coastline. And we went up and investigated it, got caught in snowstorms and freezing rainstorm, and then a windstorm, 100 and something kilometers an hour winds. In wintertime, right? I was camping out. Because it's better to buy the gear than it was to rent a hotel, right? Because you can use the gear over and over, but you only use the hotel once. That's not a Portuguese man-o'-war. That's a sail jellyfish, what they're showing you there. They claim it's the Portuguese man-o'-war, but that's not a Portuguese man-o'-war. Trust me, anybody knows it's Dana. Man, you wouldn't believe how much they sting. Not those, but the actual Portuguese man-o'-war. Between the dead birds and sometimes deadly sea creatures, it's been a strange summer at the beach. Point Lance, the mile stretch of beach is hidden gem in Newfoundland's southern Avalon Peninsula, loved by the locals and enjoyed by tourists. For the Cape St. Mary's Seabird Reserve, which we want to get down to, it's almost too late in the season. And tortured. Where the season is getting close to ending, and unfortunately, we're in the biggest. Where I'm to is the biggest migratory on the planet, bar nothing. There's 45 million migratory birds cut through here, not counting the marine life, but 45 million migratory birds chasing the same food that the marine life is chasing on their migratory routes. She found 10 dead birds, mostly gannets. And the gannets are eating the anchovies and the squids, the sardines, the krill, and capelin, stuff like that. Same as the puffins and the common murres and the churs and everything else, right? Suspect it to be infected with the bird flu. Suspect it. But you can't say they're dying of the bird flu when you don't have the evidence. Why are we doing stuff like that for? How did we get to that point where now we're just having conjectures and opinions? Suspected. He said, I didn't count. I said there's 40 dead Portuguese man o' war, she said. Well, but the picture they showed you wasn't a Portuguese man o' war. It's a sailing jellyfish. And that phenomenon's been known to happen, right, with those particular species. The Portuguese man o' war are up to 30 feet long. So they said this can't be up to a foot long. Well, that's not the same one. But anyway, tomato. People in Point Lance said they've never seen them before. So they flipped the story and went after the jellyfish. Jellyfish are notorious for turning up when or proliferating when there's a problem with the predators like turtles. And despite their appearance, they're not technically jellyfish, they're carnivorous. The tentacles are used to paralyze prey and suck in plankton and zooplankton and blah, blah, blah. Microscopic animals, right? But like plankton, a lot of people think it's just plants. But the egg larvae of mussels and sea urchins and starfish and the sperm, rather, from sea urchins and the eggs from codfish and herring and everything else, at a certain stage are considered phytoplankton. When they get up to a certain size, then they're considered the babies, so to speak, right? The larvae. Suspected to be... That's really stunning, really. Serious welts, I'll say. It was brutal, man. But he must have screwed up with the picture, I guess. Snellgrove says not unheard of for the creatures to wash up in Newfoundland, but the number of them this summer has been unusual. He's a professor at Memorial University. Well, good for you, man. I got as much respect for professors as I do for a popsicle stick that's been sitting in a mud puddle for about 6 weeks. They're the first ones to lie to you when the industry has an accident. And they're the last ones, too, because they won't shut up. Locals don't really know what to do with the man o' war and have been relying on the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to come and remove them or bury them. Again, none of that makes any sense. So they basically talked about the jellyfish instead of the dead birds, which is the real story. And it's a real story too, right? But that was used, right, as to just make people ignore the dead birds and just start talking about the jellyfish. Climate change could cause mass fish die-off. Well, climate change, this is climate change right there, look. That's a German study of climate change called radiation. Heats up the ocean, the storms go over it, they're much more powerful. It's a hotter ocean. Look at Capelin, eh? It's unusual. Let's see pictures of Capelin from the hill. Climate change accelerated currents. Well, Capelin is a huge feeder fish for whales and seals and sea lions, mammals and animals and humans and all kinds of species, right? They're what they call feeder fish, where a lot of species are dependent upon them. So if they get knocked off, if you break that part of the food chain, you've broken the food chain dramatically. Mass fish die off in U.S. lakes because the glaciers have disappeared. And we covered this over the years, right, as it was happening. And so that cold water would normally will regulate the temperatures in droughts and hot and summertime of lakes and estuaries and streams and rivers and right down into the ocean shorelines too, which is for millenniums has been dependent upon that cool water coming down in the summertime. And so now there's no cool water coming down to regulate the temperatures. And so now the rivers and streams and lakes and estuaries and marshes and that don't have that regulatory cold water coming into it anymore. And so now that environment is not hospitable to the species, right? They're dependent upon that. That's their DNA, is that cold water is part of that mix, right? And so that's why the salmon can't make their way up the river anymore, was because you didn't have that extra water coming down during droughts that would give them the little channels to get up into the deeper pools, right? And so that's why we see the failure of the salmon, one of the many reasons. But Fukushima is the catalyst. Fukushima is climate change. A new study is found. I can show you all the fake studies. Look, I can publish, I bet you any money I can publish a study. I can publish a study saying the bird flu killed Elvis. And I can get someone to publish it. Some journal will publish that for sure. Did the bird flu kill Elvis? And 22% said, you're my heroes. The right answer obviously is no. Hopefully. That's a joke, by the way. And I don't know what to vote. I put that there for badness. And I don't know what Dana's trying to say. So that's what 39% of the people think. I don't understand what Dana's trying to say. And it's okay. It's all right, man. It's cool. I don't understand either, so don't feel bad. The poll doesn't matter. Let's put it that way. Hey, we got James is calling in. Hi, James. Sorry. Hi, James. How are you, sir? I was yelling at the phone instead of hitting the speaker.
I always have. I wanted to call him because the thought came across, and it seems like every time it comes across, I always forget. And I always been wanting to ask you this, and I do not by any means insinuate any sort of conspiracy or any of that kind of nonsense.
Sure.
But I really seem to recall that the day before Fukushima happened, they had a big meeting about what could happen if there was a tsunami and wiped out the generators. I really recall hearing that. Do you remember anything about that being possible?
I don't. I don't. But originally, there was a lot of conspiracies, right?
Sure. Okay.
Originally,
Maybe.
they were throwing them out, looking for one to stick on the wall, right? And when it did, then that went viral. There was all kinds of public relation firms were doing that. They were. I didn't mean to cut you off, James. But what I seen happening when you look back at it, because we have that luxury, was they were trying to dilute. They were trying to, because the uranium stocks had just flatlined. These people were in very powerful positions. They were trying to bring some credibility back to the industry, right? There was desperation, and it hasn't stopped, obviously, in 11 years. But originally, there were some crazy stories came out. That one I don't, not off the top of my head, no. Go ahead, James.
Well, I don't know where I heard this from, but I guess it just kind of went into a what-if scenario, because since the earthquake was so powerful, it actually disrupted the Earth's orbit, right? I mean, that's
it shifted Japan 6 feet to the east, right?
It was so, but I'm thinking earthquakes are a common thing, right? Like they happen constantly throughout the geological record.
Constantly.
But if they were to have the possibility that maybe 1 in 100,000 could jeopardize the Earth's orbit somehow, wouldn't we be somewhere off by Saturn by now, technically? We did the math. I'm just thinking, I'm not trying, I'm just saying,
There's so much weird stuff about. I mean, it's the ignorance they play on it. Like they all. It's like they are. I mean, it's a convenient problem to have. Or, just the kind of the language that was addressed and still is today, where we think that, Fukushima, it's a problem, but whatever, but, and there, the recent reports about them trying to get back into nuclear power again, and it's like, and I see this common theme since we're having these energy problems. I was on this live stream the other night, and there's like thousands of people watching this thing, and the subject of nuclear came up. Someone said, we need more nuclear power, and blah, 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 and these people speak in their minds, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to throw a bone at these people. You do realize you need external power to operate a nuke plant. They don't operate on your own power. There's nothing green about it.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
And people they don't know what to say. They just don't know what to say because they just never heard this before.
Oh, it's a smack right between their eyes when you say it to them, right? Like,
and so I've been doing that more in person, and it's amazing the reaction. It's like it's the reaction. People, they look at you like deer in headlights, and they know they just don't know what to say, but they just be on the default with being nice, and they agree with you, like yeah, it's crazy, but anyway, there's a strong argument to make out there. I think if anyone is out there caught, trying to make a big play out of, and there's some smart people out there.
Yeah, there is some.
Yeah. There's smart people out, and they don't know any better. Is the problem? They just don't know. They're just they're woefully so unprepared in every way to understand. Because why? Because they trust it. They just trust some magical.
I had a friend of mine. I did cut you off for a second, but I had a friend of mine who went to on his phone went to the United Nations website to counter argument me, and we sat there for like 40 minutes, and I didn't need to go anywhere. I already knew the answers, right? And so at the end of the 40 minutes, he just couldn't accept that there was an answer. Go ahead, James. Yeah.
But think about. It's like the things are in plain sight, because obviously, if you were going to do nuclear power correctly, you don't mess with water, you don't mess with steam. You're doing exactly what they do on spacecraft. You're using thermoelectric couplers, and you're basing it off the Seebeck effect, because you have this temperature differential from whatever degrees of plutonium.
Right, that's right. That's right,
and
yeah.
And then the other side's so cold, it's like this big temperature swing, so that's the Seebeck effect. It drives the current, and you can get some amazing power from that. What the hell do they do that here? It'd be safer, it's less complex. There's the whole bomb manufacturing reason. That's really the reason, because if they're really smart about nuclear energy, they would do the thermal coupler.
They could. The problem with it was that they got to use some serious powerful fuel rod in order to get the kind of energy back, right? So if they released that into the public, it wouldn't be hard for someone to bust one open and put it in the local drinking water, or at the local government building, and then the government employees each day are getting incredible doses of radiation, right? And so there was an apartment where somebody had put very high level of radiation into the wall, and the people that lived in that side of the building were dying, quite a lot of them, of leukemias, and everybody in the family was dying. And so finally someone brought in a Geiger counter, and they discovered the wall was hot, and they broke it open. There was just this piece there but the size of a quarter of pure, I can't remember, I think it was cesium or something. But the emissions were killing people constantly. So imagine, because when I say that, I think about where they wanted to put it and make cars, right? And that was the theory. Cars weren't going to have a reactor. They were going to operate the same as the spacecraft with just that energy, right? And
no, you can't. Yeah, that wouldn't work. No.
Right.
You'd have to.
The shielding.
These reactors would have to be way far away from anything. Yeah, they'd have to.
They were trying, right? You remember that?
Yeah, they were trying.
Yeah.
Right.
And aircrafts and trains and everything else. You know? Yeah. And so they got away with ships, but because you can put 1 million pounds of lead on it, right? Like they done with the Sturges.
Sure.
Yeah.
but it's insanity. It's just pure insanity.
It's insanity.
The world should. What the IAEA is completely lost. That they have no control over anything. I mean, it's a big C. It's a big hazard right now. If anything, if they had any integrity, if we should trust any kind of UN organization, they should be able to, we got to abandon nuclear. By the way, it takes all this fossil fuel to operate. They're not going to speak the truth because they're all in on it.
It's ridiculous. Well, they promote it. If you go to their website, you'll find all kinds of workshops, all kinds of degrees you can take, all kinds of participation, all kinds of volunteer. They promote it, right? And they promote the nasty side of it. Yeah.
Well, it's like the World Economic Forum, the WEF. You go to their website and put in Kevin Spacey's name in their search engine. It shows a picture of him as being a member.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
You're thinking, oh my God. I mean, it's like that's what's truly going on behind the scenes. Like it really is.
The World Economic Forum. For anybody who's not familiar, that's they're definitely bad actors, right? But they got a lot of influence over governments. Over half the Canadian government has went to their presentations. Half the Canadian government. That's it's absurd.
I just want to add to the the footage you brought over. I mean, the expedition, just how stunning it was. The silence. I mean, the cameras, the microphone picked up nothing.
It was just pure silence. Their microphones are really good, folks. It even makes me sound good, right? Those microphones. Nothing.
It was scary.
It was
quiet.
nothing.
I mean, I got headphones on. I'm blaring the volume. It's just quiet.
Yeah. I know. That's how I listened to it before I posted it. And I was like, it's so spooky. It's so spooky. If I had the right setup, normally I would put music into something like that. But how could you, right? It was just like, what? Like, last night, it was so quiet. There was a bird last night. I got him on video, too, that was chirping for a little tiny bit. I got all excited. I was like, holy shit. And I went out and I figured out where the sound was coming from. And it was echoing. It was just like this. It was everywhere, this echo. But it was just that one little bird. And I was imagining if there was 2 or 3 of them, It was so silent. There was no cricket. There was no frogs croaking. No rabbit. It was so quiet. It was surreal, the whole experience. And last year and the year before, we didn't see the birds, but we heard them, right? I don't know if people remember that. But last year, there was no birds visit my site except for that one spot where you had a gray jay come up and took food out of my hand. But outside of that, there was, in the last couple of years, not a single bird visited my site, my campgrounds. And then this year, when I went out there, the first thing I noticed was there was no sing, because I used to stop, right? And you could always hear, it was pretty well the same birds, the same species, but there nothing. And I stopped probably altogether in 3 days, 30 or 40 times, where I shut the engine off and just,
What was that area like in the summer in the 80s? Could you remember?
Well, it was amazing. It was amazing. bees and wasps, and there was no bees, no wasps, because they usually, they'll come around and bug you a little tiny bit. And they're very loud, right? You know how a bee and wasp is. None of that. I've seen 5 dragonflies, 5 butterflies. I got pictures I'll show Sunday night of flies, these like what I call black mosquitoes, but they're not actually mosquitoes. I'll show pictures of that on Sunday night. There was nothing.
It's just.
Yeah, nothing.
It's unreal. It's unreal. All right. I'll let you go, Dana. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thanks, James. No, good stuff, my friend. Thank you. I'm glad you called in, man. It breaks up the show. It gives me a chance too, right? Okay, my friend. Love you, buddy. Take care, man.
Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye. That's James Lucid. You know him in the comments as James Lucid. That's not his real last name, but that's what I call him. Even if he phones me up, I'll always say, Mr. Lucid. I'm just used to it now, right? It's a great last name, by the way. That would be a fantastic last name to have. A new study has found, because when you hear me snicker, right, the sarcasm laugh, whenever I heard new study or professor or scientist, I got, I'm sure some of you people are wonderful people. Not all of you, by no means, but some of you probably. So I kind of lost track of that story. But let me bring you in, because that's the lowest number we've ever seen on a stream is 15. That's the lowest number I think I've ever seen on a live stream is 15 people. It's the lowest amount of likes I've ever had this far into the video. It's the lowest number of votes, which is understandable. I just done that for badness, folks, because because that's when I was setting up the show, I was like, well, what do I put there? And did the bird flu kill Elvis? Because I'm going to put that T-shirt up on my website after, by the way, with a picture, because that's what you expect an academic to show up with a paper saying the bird flu killed Elvis, and it'll get published, right? If an academic shoves that to a journal will go like, well, yeah, we'll publish it. Well, go ahead. Is he a scientist? Yeah, we'll publish it. He probably needs it to freak over a bunch of school kids or something, so we better publish it. Now, I know that's pretty harsh, Dana, to say about professors. There's not that many of them, Dana. Well, hang on there. Let me defend myself. I'm pretty good at that. I'll show you why. I said that. Bear with me. It's the same thing with doctors. I'm just going to show you professors so you can kind of wrap your mind around. Waiting, Dana, waiting. Come on. We're getting there. Bingo. No. One more second. Well, the problem with this is I got too much information gathered up. Could take a few seconds. Here we go. Gotcha. Professors. I forgot to put in keywords. I'm not going to run through a lot of these. I'm just going to show you. This is a tiny fraction. So when I think of professors, I'm a little different than the average person because I got a tendency to do my homework. See? UVA professor convicted of assault and battery. Left-wing professor convicted of raping a 13-month-old baby. Because he's a professor, he's allowed to do it. And it was research. Research becomes rape. And a professor convicted of drunk driving 3 times. So if these people don't know it better, then, and they're teaching students, the students should all get their money back, right? Professor convicted of falsifying retirement assets. Convicted of, UNM professor convicted of attempt theft by swindle. A sex crime professor can go to Hong Kong to go to work because he can't get work in North America anymore. Ex-Ivy League professor convicted in wife's death is freed. Another professor convicted of poisoning his wife. Another one convicted of stealing $700,000 from NASA. But that's the norm in NASA, by the way. Another professor convicted of spying. Arms export professors. Medical. This is Harvard Medical School psychiatrist. Was sex for grades, right? Professor, and lots of them out there, baby. Convicted of sharing technology, convicted in child porn. There's a lot of those, right? Professor convicted of child porn. Defrauding the students, professor. MIT professor, millionaire, ex-MIT professor, convicted. Another Harvard professor convicted of stealing $600,000. They're sophisticated criminals, Dana. That's what a professor is. Like, a professor's job is to come out and tell you Fukushima is like a banana, which got nothing to do with a banana, of course. That's all I'm saying. If you start looking at the crimes, when there's not that many professors, you start looking at the crimes that they commit and how many of them's been convicted. If this many's got convicted, how many got away with it? They never caught them all. You know what I mean, right? I apologize for common sense, but it's a rare commodity this day and age. I'm going to skip ahead and get past all of them eventually. There's so many of them, you can't keep up with them, eh? 70-year-old law professor convicted of beating up a taxi driver. No, that one's raping children. This one was incest. Anyway, you kind of get the picture, right? Apparently being a professor is a license to rape and sodomize and kill and everything else. Climate change will decrease the number of fish species. Oh, you mean Fukushima will decrease the number of fish species? It's not just the Pacific Ocean, of course. The radiation covered the entire planet. The entire planet. In 16 days, that's France's model. But even worse, at ground zero, not just Fukushima, but 14 prefectures, the food was banned in 55 countries. You're being murdered. If you're in Canada, you're being just destroyed at your supermarkets. They lifted all restrictions in Canada after 93 days. 55 countries kept the restrictions. Let's keep it rolling here. Climate change, climate change. Climate change and bird flu is going to wipe out all the trees and fish and everything else. But so bird flu gets all the mammals and animals and birds, and climate change gets all the fish and everything else that the bird flu can't get their fingers on, apparently. And so the real culprit, obviously, is Fukushima, with warming of the oceans due to climate change. Well, look, you can't blame gas, oil, and coal emissions because they only go 50 or 100 miles and then they fall down. They usually don't make it that far. If you didn't build your coal plants in your cities, you wouldn't have the pollution. That's done on purpose to promote nuclear. Because a nuclear plant, they want them to last for 100 years. So build a coal plant, let it run for 10 years, make everybody torture everybody, and then suggest they get nuclear to be happy to get it. Because you can't see it or smell it or taste it or hear it. It's 1,000 times worse. Because you have no... If you live where there's a coal plant for 20 years, you finally get sick, the solution is now you move away, you'll get better. If you stay there, you're just going to get sicker. But why would you build a coal plant in a city? Nikola Tesla gave you the technology to build it far away and transport the energy. Let's keep rolling. Alaska snow crabs have disappeared. Where they went is a mystery. They didn't disappear. They were exterminated by Fukushima. Okay, and so crabs live on the ocean floor. They're not swimming around. They're not changing neighborhoods per se, and just by swimming with the currents, right? Their larvae do, but the crabs don't. So crabs are on the ocean floor. The radiation saturates the ocean. A lot of it ends up on the ocean floor at the surface, right? The stuff at the surface gets carried back up, by the way, to the surface where the phytoplankton are. So the phytoplankton are getting bombarded on the way through, and then it's brought back up with nutrients, and that destroyed. So the Alaska snow crabs, the crabs are right in ground zero, so to speak. Let me see here. Let me just run through some of these headlines quickly because before I jump into that story, just let me take a little short moment here. Maybe. An enormous amount of radiation contamination flowing from Fukushima will probably imperil the entire Pacific Ocean. And at the top of it is Alaska, where those crabs are though, right? And now we've done research expeditions up to the Alaska border year after year. So here, bear with me, threatens other countries' food chain. Cesium remains dispersed throughout the water column from the surface to the ocean floor, which is where the crabs are. And Alaska, where they have a lot of ice, when the ice melts, you have a pulse release, right? So you have all this fallout, and this is 19-day model, by the way. And if there's a lot of ice in Alaska, that's not going to reach the ocean floor. But eventually, because of global warming caused by Fukushima, which is global warming, and 80 years of releases from the fuel pools, this is pulsing energy every second. See, because gas, oil, and coal emissions don't do this. The only thing that does that is radiation. That's what this model is. That model is only based on venting. Venting is a fraction of a percent 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 magnitudes of a actual meltdown. And then the reactors in Japan had decades of reactor cores at the top of the buildings. They had lost their inventories too. Fukushima fallout spiked a year after 3/11. Fukushima plant is hemorrhaging radioactivity. They don't know where it's coming from. And the big mystery is why contamination is coming out now in such a hurry. 2013. It peaked in 2012 also, where there was more than originally had come out. And because, like after 1,000 days, strontium-90 peaks, and it peaks for about 10,000 plus days. So for every cesium-137, there's 100 strontium-90s. Strontium-90 is a bone seeker. So for all the species with bones, it's bad news. Seawater being poisoned at a continuous rate. So they want you to believe that Fukushima's in tanks, which is a ludicrous assertion, by the way. Because typically the reactors need 4,500 tons a minute. West Coast gray whale population in 2016 plummeted by 6,000. They updated it at the end of the year to 7,000. That's just gray whales. The same thing was happening to humpback, to mink whales, to beak whales, just about every species of the whales that I can think of. And we've covered them over the years. And if YouTube didn't take down my site when I was looking for spiders last year, I could direct you to some of that. But instead, I got to work like a dog to try to regain some of the audience so we can have a conversation. Officials blasted Japan's government over Fukushima. Such immoral people. They let the radiation substance flow out freely and said nothing while contaminating the ocean. It's absurd. Now they're trying to cover the whole thing up. 250 million liters of Fukushima contaminated water flowed into the Pacific. Japan cover-up could violate international laws. First off, 250 million liters. Remember, these reactors need a million gallons a minute typically. You had 4 buildings melted down. They turned that into 3 meltdowns, and they don't include the fuel pools, which are all missing too. So radioactive sea spray has been shown to blow hundreds of kilometers inland. That's important because that's where a lot of the insects are within 100 kilometers of the coastline. They're acclimated to more salt in their diet. The radiation liberated the same way as salt is. Same vector, right? Post-Fukushima horror, an unpredictable amount of damage to the Pacific. As I showed you, the airborne plume is catastrophic, right? They had 1,000 tanks in 2013, 1,200 tanks in 2014, 900 tanks in 2017, 1,000 tanks in 2019, 1,000 tanks in 2020, 1,000 tanks in 2021, 1,000 tanks in 2022, 1,000 tanks in 2013, and 1,000 tanks in 2022. How many did you fill up in the last 9 years? So when you start looking at how the radiation ends up on the coastline, blows into communities, people get an exceptional dose. But humans aren't the only species that are vulnerable. So the insects, they live right at ground zero, right, where the radiation falls out. Or the spiders can't tie on to the trees and the bushes anymore because the radiation is sucked up from the plants. They suck it up the same as nutrients, that they suck up from the soil. That gets distributed to the tips generally, right, to make it grow bigger and longer and whatever, right? More foliage. New York Times, ocean life faces mass extinction, may be on the precipice of a major extinction event in marine wildlife. In January 18, 2015, I was on the ocean on the marine expeditions when that headline came out for quite a few months, and I was still out there till March of that year before I came home. That's basically who they were looking at because we had showed it was an extinction. So when insects and birds and animals and mammals and humans and species ingest it or drink it or consume it or whatever, get it into your system, and you're getting it all the time, each one is pulsing every second inside your body for the rest of your life. It sequesters in your muscles, your organs, your bones, where it's basically stuck there like glue, or just assimilated into your... And it increases the exposure by a factor of 1 trillion. So imagine, 11 becquerels a kilogram will cause holes in children's hearts. What do you think that's going to do to insects and animals and mammals in the forest, right? When you multiply that up by 64 to get a square meter, and there's not just, like they're going to lie to you, call it cesium and iodines. There's 1,000 fission products you got to worry about. There's over 6 million pounds found that was so contaminated South Korea wouldn't touch it. How much got through? That shouldn't have never been shipped in the first place. If you got 6 billion pounds that is too radioactive to keep in South Korea, then the entire ocean has to be suffering, right? And so much evidence. We've got 2 more of these and we'll get back into the headlines. Stop claiming that food is safe, which is the greatest headline in the world, by the way. Fears of ocean contamination, but it was airborne, right? We showed you the airborne plumes. It's not just the ocean. But these stories and this and that is about the ocean. Senior Japan official, nuclear material flowing into the ocean. They want you to believe it's all gone into tanks. This is a ludicrous, absolutely nutty assertion to make that it's all gone and put in the tanks. These are lethal doses by the liter to humans. Imagine what it does. Alaska snow crab disappeared. Where they went is a mystery. Okay, back to that story. So they're saying that there's an extinction. Never seen it coming. And the price is skyrocketing for Alaska. All these boats now are out of business up there. The theories are many. They moved into Russia water, dead because the predators got them. They ate each other. And listen, they've been there for, millenniums. All of a sudden, the predators ate them all up, did they? They scuttled off the continental shelf, and scientists didn't see them. I showed you what I think of professors and scientists early with the documentation. Oh, alien abduction. Well, you sure it wasn't Sasquatch got them? Disappearance of Alaska snow crab probably is connected to climate change. They're going to just throw everything at it so that the reader has no hope. The reader is like, I ain't going to read the story. These people are batshit crazy. Honey, the snow crabs are gone. Like the reason, hang on, I got a better way. Sometimes, I clicked on Dana. And so I busted up, man, the last 3 days. Holy shit. Excuse the language. The amount of pain I was in. I suffered it out as long as I could. I seen the weather was going to be bad. I realized that I'm hurting myself on top of that. And I didn't want to come back, right? Because it's too hard to get out there. But I got to do what I got to do. There's nothing I can do about it. Here's Helen Caldicott. She wrote 14 anti-nuclear books. She's going to try to convince you that the building doesn't look like that, which is the official picture, and over there is the official picture. One of them can't be real. She's going to say, no, the one to your left is the real one. Don't listen to Dana. Fear-mongering.
Let me ask you this. You've said that if the spent fuel pool in number 4 collapses, that you would evacuate your family from Boston. Do you think we would ever know the truth of what's going on there? And the reason I ask is because we've seen coverage in the national news media here in the United States from ABC News and others that take video cameras in saying that they're being given exclusive access to number 4 in the removal of the fuel rods, which is said to have begun. And what we see in the video being shared here in America is a pristine interior building. It doesn't look like a building in which the top blew off in a hydrogen explosion.
The Japanese are very tidy people, and they have, by robot control and by human beings, removed the debris from the top of Building 4, and it does look pristine.
So Helen Caldicott, she's done this hundreds of times in interviews, but it can never look like that again. It's a nuclear meltdown, Helen, who wrote 14 books on anti-nuclear. She's a shill. And that's disappointing, right? She's extremely popular, got 14 books out there, started Physicians for Social Responsibility with 29,000 doctors, and they're all being hoodwinked by this creature known as Helen Caldicott. Because the reactors are destroyed, there's nothing intact about it, right? It's a frightening that this is happening, this is how the world works. And generations of these people were born to go get that education to tell that lies. It just doesn't seem real, does it? So all of these, this is just a fraction, by the way, of the medias, but ABC Australia, CNN, of course, scum, BBC in the United Kingdom, CBS in America, these are huge medias, had to participate, the producers, the editors, the owners, the entire staff, everybody had to participate in the lie, right? Because there was no dissenting opinions. There was never anybody come out and said, you're lying. You're not on top of a building that don't exist. So your media, why did your media work so hard to convince you the building was perfect instead of destroyed? What was the big deal about telling the truth? Why is it still frowned upon to acknowledge that the building was destroyed. Why did they fake being on top of a building that don't exist? That should horrify you. It's because this is a planet killer. And they panicked, and this was a big mistake when they done that. That was a desperation. It's a harbinger, a warning about how quickly a fishery can be wiped out in this new volatile world. And that was James Lucid had called in originally when that headline came out, right? I didn't catch it. And I gathered up a bunch of stories on it, and I was like, holy shit. It's been completely wiped out. And they try to downplay it for a decade, which is Fukushima, see? Steady downcline for a decade. But no, that's not the real story. The real story was the season started and they weren't there anymore. That's what the official story now is. But listen, the industry is so anal. They were out there all the time. They knew this was happening. They just decided not to look in the mirror. But the whole story was the lies and the deceit. Alaska snow crabs have disappeared. Where they went is a mystery. And you can count on media to make you want to throw up every time you listen to them. Again, they're dead because predators got them, because they eat each other. They just regurgitate the same thing in different media. It's the exact same paragraphs. And then these scumbags, of course, these degenerate, despicable scumbags. Bye-bye Alaska snow crabs. Hello, Fukushima. Alaska snow crab disappeared. Where they went is a mystery. So he's right there, all the same paragraphs with the same author at the same time. Washington Post in Alaska's declining crab harvest. King crab legs are now $1.99 a pound. Wow. $200 a pound. Holy shit, man. And again, the same headline. And Yahoo, which was just bought by a big lobbyist group last year, is weaponized now against the population. Right where they went is a mystery. There was somebody... Yeah, I could do that. Well, first you want me to tell a personal story I've never told anybody before. Well, let me see. You know, when I was about 14 years old, I had felt that I was adopted. And it was going through my mind for quite a few years. And so, anyway, Mom and Dad was in the kitchen, and I walked in and I asked Dad, I said, Master Chang, I said, am I adopted? And he said, no, you're not adopted. You ask your mama, Lin Su, he's not adopted, is he? That's a joke, folks. That's a joke. I wasn't adopted. I was found under a rock, according to the nuclear industry. I was hatched. I wasn't adopted. I was like a codfish egg or something. Let's give Kevin Blanche a call. Oh, shit. Doctor, call me day. I missed a call. Shit. Where's Kevin Blanche to? Gotta do this the hard way. See if he's around. Yeah, he probably... I got his answering machine. He must be on the other line. He'll call me back if he sees me. Yeah, let's keep going. Alaska snow crabs are gone. That's a huge. There's so many communities dependent upon the snow crab on top of that, and species. Monster fish eludes captures Chinese city drains a lake, and millions of people watch the live show. This is the creature they were looking for, and they were saying it attacks humans, right? This one was estimated 27.5 inches. They drained the whole lake and streamed it on TV. The origins is traced back some 100 million years and would attack humans. But one of the commenters were saying most lakes in Minnesota have those species, and they've never heard of a report about them attacking humans. Wouldn't that be just wild if that's true? A 30-acre artificial body of water with aquatic plants near the bottom. After 2 weeks of searching in vain, the local government announced it would drain the entire lake. It was 37 million viewers had watched the live stream. That's huge. That's huge. I'm not sure what the hell that is. Oh, yeah. Bird found in Bradford test positive for the West Nile virus. Why are you checking random birds for West Nile virus in the middle of nowhere? Finding the infected bird is a reminder we need to continue to take appropriate measures to protect ourselves against the West Nile virus this year. And you can see where that place is located. Georgia Sanctuary says bird flu has killed 700 wild. Now there are pathogens and viruses that'll mutate from radiation, right? From the evidence from this, there was a trial in The Hague about the coronavirus, where they were showing with all the academics that it was they had released an actual coronavirus, but that wasn't what was killing people. What was killing people was the jab. And it wasn't killing everybody, but a big percentage of people with vulnerable immune systems. But at the same time, if you had a car accident and you died, and they tested positive for coronavirus, instead of getting $14,000 at the hospital for a death, they got $34,000 because it was a death with coronavirus as a positive. And remember, they looted the economies worldwide, trillions and trillions of dollars, and a lot of the money went to buy off these types of people. So Noah's Ark, it was just stories that were cropping up. Now, the vultures are going to bioaccumulate radiation, but I don't know. That one could easily be something else, obviously, right? Dead white-tailed eagle chick tests positive. What the hell are you doing testing chicks? To catch the bird flu off that trout, I wonder? Concerns are growing for Scotland's largest bird of prey after a dead white-tailed eagle chick tested positive for avian flu. And now the problem with all of these stories is these are new carriers, right? So if that's true, then that's the first of its species in the Northern Hemisphere to have that designation, right? And so there was just this couple of month period where they were just throwing everything that they found dead, they took it and got it tested. This was a departure from normal roadkill, right? Where they would just push it off the side of the road, so to speak. Now they're sending it to a lab and checking it. Even though it got ran over by a car, it could have had the bird flu, so we got to send away samples, Dana. None of that makes sense, right? Because it costs money. Suspected dead eagle chicks at numerous locations. They checked. At least 4 white-tailed eagle nests have died either shortly before or after fledgling. And last year, there was a study we covered where on the east coast of Canada, where they have these nests for certain birds, they do it each year. They were saying there was no surviving fledglings because of lack of insect, right? They had, this is what they were saying too, they were emaciated. But this year now, every bird and every animal that dies probably had the bird flu, Dana. They're crazy. They're crazy. But in the middle of it all, where they originally said it was bird flu, they had independent tests done, as I showed you earlier, turned out to be starvation. Because this is all, instead of checking to see if it's emaciated, they're not allowed to go near it. Don't touch it. You get the bird flu. Make your cats and dogs sick when you go home, too. You don't want to do that. You don't touch that dead, emaciated bird. And keep her going. Shortage of cockles in wading the sea is affecting migratory birds. Cockles you'll see on where they'll spit water when you go to the mud flats, because that's where they live, in mud flats, right? Typically with sand, but typically mud flats. They'll spit water 6 or 7 feet. You can spot them as you're coming ashore, right? And so Poacher's Island in the west coast of British Columbia was the only spot that I found cockles. And Poacher's Island is inside of Eddie's Pass, I think it is. I can't remember. Up in British Columbia, right? And there was another spot, too, where in that area, there's huge tides run through that area, right? 19-foot tide exchange. So they say here the hot weather is cooking. Now, what I was showing on my research expeditions, that the beaches in British Columbia are made of shells that are ground up over hundreds of thousands of years, right? And there was no adult oysters or clams or little necks or manillas or scallop shells or gooey duck shells or razorback clam shells or any kind of shellfish on the beaches. But the beaches are made of shells that are deteriorated. That's what there's 27,000 islands up there. Each island got multiple beautiful, stunning beaches on it. You see those pictures at my website, thenuclearproctologist.org. Now, yes, because the ocean has heated up, right? Because of Fukushima's big pulse. And this is forever. It's just going to get hotter. It's hemorrhaging into the ocean all the time. The cockles died at low tide when the sun is at its hottest. They think. Right? Again, this is an opinion, a conjecture. I got another conjecture. At low tide, the radiation fallout lands directly on them. These are filter feeders. They bioaccumulate radiation 115,000 times more than a fish would because they're filter feeders. They're designed to filter particles almost as small as that. See? That's what cockles and all the other species, these are filter feeders. It is something which we see more often as summers are getting warmer. Again, screeching. So in the center of all of it, I'll cover that story again. August the 16th, 2022. Starvation caused the mass bird deaths. Great shearwaters were the primary casualties, but many other species were there too, right? Seagulls, ducks, terns, cormorants. The large number of birds in the island shores in June have been confirmed to have died from starvation. In June, the state issued an announcement saying they suspected the avian influenza was killing the birds, but they had done their own test. You can go read it yourself. So in the middle of all the bird the alleged bird flu die-offs was this area with a huge area of die-offs. When they tested themselves instead of the state, the result was starvation for all the species. And in April, all the species that were dying were the same species. They were dying of starvation. They admit that. But all of a sudden, both sides of the Atlantic at the same time came out and invoked bird flu as a catalyst for the mass die-offs, which was at the same time they were promoting nuclear as a renaissance, which is a failed renaissance. And I say that because between 2020 and 2026, the International Energy Agency estimated there would be new 4,800 gigawatt capacities brought online of renewables, which is equal to 5,500 full-size nuclear power plants in 6 years. So last year, 2021, worldwide was 291 gigawatts came online of renewables. That's equal to 333 nuclear power plants in a 12-month period, right? And it was an increase of the year before, which was 260 gigawatts of renewables. So 4,800 gigawatts by 2026 is the animosity equivalent of all gas, oil, and coal and nuclear plants on the planet combined. which, and there's a lot of things holding it back, right? And commodity prices now have skyrocketed. The coronavirus slowed it down for 2 years, blah, 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 blah. But it's still on track to even exceed the 4,800 gigawatts by 2026. The only thing holding us back was the storage, and the storage exists, like compressed air storage and pumped hydro storage, for instance. Compressed air storage, you're just digging mine shafts and compressing air down there, rather than stupid, idiotic, moronic batteries, dipstick, dummy batteries. Idiot. And the idea of the batteries is so you don't have a solution for renewables for storage. The nuclear industry is disgusting. It's scuttled all of humanity's and all the species' future. They're absolutely, unequivocally disgusting. Absolutely parasitic scum. Botulism suspected killing waterfowl at an area of ponds and lakes and ponds, which probably was. Who knows? But it wasn't bird flu. I can guarantee you. Rescue organization updated with calls about sick sea lions in California beaches. Flooded with calls about sea lions. Now, we've covered this extensively over the last decade, right? They've had just thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of emaciated seals and sea lions washing up on California all the way to Alaska, really. Bear with me. We'll find it for you right quick. Why not? It's so good to have the pressure off my right hip. It's hard to appreciate how much agony I've been in the last 3 days. There we go. I'll just give you the topsy-turvy. See, the whole problem with this story is there's so many of them, right? But let me just give you, because of Fukushima, just let me run you through really quickly a couple of these. Very sick, very emaciated. The food supply is being killed off. Every bird we're seeing is starving to death. Mind-blowing die-off of seabirds on their way from California to Alaska. And I was up there on research expeditions during this. It was over 1 million common turs had died, and there was 1.5 million or something rather, and 1 million Cassini auklets. The common murres and common turs will dive all day at 600 feet. And they're feeding on anchovies and squid and sardines and krill and whatever, that size of species, right? Every bird we're seeing is starving to death. Record number of deaths declared, unusual mortality. This is sea lions. Babies being found severely emaciated. Severely emaciated. Countless dead birds reported in the Pacific. Nothing will eat them. I was there, man. There is nothing there. All of them are starving. More washed up in the last few months than all the recorded history combined. Carts filled with emaciated dead bodies. Animals sick, starving, and emaciated. Sardines, crayfish disappeared. They just vanished like the snow crabs. Marine mammals are starving. Experts like walking skeletons talking about the seals and sea lions. And so normally, you remember the pictures I showed you earlier where the rocks are covered in marine life? Now the rocks have nothing, see? Because normally they would, if they had to, they got separated, they would eat the species on the shoreline, see? If they ate rocks, they would excrete them because they had enough nutrition from the rocks. But now the rocks are naked. Extremely emaciated. No babies born in the last 2 years for the killer whales, sick and emaciated. Marine birds disappearing in the Pacific Northwest. Significant ecological crash. Seals and sea lions starving to death along the California coast. It just spiked. And so that goes on and on and on. And even owls, acute hemorrhaging found in dead owls. Hemorrhaging is radiation, typically radiation poisoning too, right? In very poor conditions, badly emaciated because they have leukemia, they can't uptake nutrition no more. Don't even get me started. Extinction threat for salmons, sardines, squid, sea urchins, kelp. Now, again, I was on the research expeditions in 2016 when these headlines were coming out. Most of that stuff is based upon the research I was shown of the coastline was exterminated, right? Because there was nobody else providing the documentation. They didn't do it themselves. They weren't saying so-and-so and blah, blah, blah done it. No. I was the only person doing the expeditions at that time. Facing possibility of an extinction. We may be on the precipice, the last one, of a major extinction event in marine life. And so when you look at my research, the documentation I showed earlier, you see why I say these things, because I went and done the research and there's no maybes about it. So when you talk about neurotoxins, right from they're talking about domoic acid typically, and they've been trying to use domoic acid as the reason for all kinds of mass die-offs. But ultimately, the research shows they didn't have domoic acid. It wasn't and again, right, this industry is so despicable that they had done that for so many years, because we covered it for many years, right? Climate crisis killing off key insects and spreading insect-borne diseases. I just think the media is despicable. It's the only way you can... I've lost complete faith in the media, 100% unequivocal. So many lies, so consistent in all of them. At what point, you should get rid of moose licenses and get journalists and nuclear scientist licenses. And so you got to go get one of them and put a tag on them and feed them to the killer whales after. We need insects and their numbers are decreasing. And we showed this consistently over the years. We studied this specifically hardcore now the last 3 years. Yep. Well, that's a good story. Unfortunately, they tell lots of lies. 2 dead dolphins sightings reported on the same stretch of coastline. Because, like pre-Fukushima, the odds of finding 2 dead birds on the same beach, or 2 dead whales on the same beach, was you got better chances of getting hit by a Soviet satellite in the next 3 seconds. Global effort to halt the rapid decline of vultures. Which are bioaccumulating a lot of radiation. There's 40 million mangroves are dead, and then they put in, is the moon to blame? I don't know. I was like, wait, what? Because the mangroves are nurseries, right? For all kinds of species. All that's normally underwater. And so there's a lot of species, their babies are raised in that. It's very difficult for predators, big predators, to prey on them, right? And so when they talk about the moon, the wobble in the moon's orbit is partly to blame. It just makes you want to pull your hair out, what's left of it. Which is how I lost most of my hair as it is, by pulling it out of my head from reading the nuclear industry. Now, last night, because we were studying insects for a couple of days, and so I shot this last night. I actually heard a bird in the trees, which I thought I heard a loon, and that's why I broke out the camera. And I did hear a loon for sure, all by himself, the poor bugger. So let me play this little video. I just heard a loon, I think. Pretty sure I heard one. Figures. Get out the camera and they shut up. It'll brighten up in a second. That's almost dark last night.
I don't know if
I'm playing with to try to get to brighten up.
I still haven't worked. Well, I kind of worked the camera settings out, but I didn't brush back up on it before I came out here. So it's still the 14th of September, Wednesday. Seen a squirrel about an hour ago. Must have been what I heard jumping on my trailer last night. It didn't sound very heavy anyway. I thought I saw a mink yesterday too. This is what it looked like this morning. No birds singing this morning. Let's get down into the water. Thought I had seen a fish breach. I was washing my hair.
I seen 2 last night with the flashlight.
I'm assuming it was a fish anyway.
2 fish.
He was right here. So if there was anything here moving, you see it. Same thing this morning. I think the reason I seen spider webs on the dead trees was because they were dead. They don't suck up radiation when they're dead. They could have been dead pre-Fukushima, right? They're in pretty bad shape, but I'm not sure I took pictures of that place. I should have. But I had to reset the camera about an hour ago.
Yeah, there is a bird, I think, in this one.
Wow, I hear that. There he is again.
There's just one bird, though, but awesome.
I think there's two of them.
I don't know if that's the gimbal being interfered. Yeah, maybe it was two of them. That was pretty amazing.
He's quite a ways away from it all. Hopefully we picked them up.
Yeah, but I was like, what I was doing was holding my breath, and so I would squeak when I was trying. And you might have heard that earlier, but when I got down by that, now he might have. When I was talking, the bird might have chirped, and I kind of heard it, right, and I was like, because I've been there a couple of days, I haven't heard nothing, right? And all of a sudden there's a bird, and I got the camera out, and I was like, sweet. And so I think it was two birds were there. And because it's almost dark, it's hard to appreciate. The camera's really good, right? But about a half an hour after that, I spotted them, and one of them, I seen the branches moving, right? And I thought first it was a squirrel, but then I seen the branches moving quite far away, and I realized that wasn't a squirrel doing that. I did see a squirrel, for sure, but there wasn't enough insects there to feed a couple of birds. There wasn't, eh? Okay. And the flies in the UK are sluggish. Wow. That's crazy. The maritime slave. Nice handle. We're all slaves, aren't we? At this stage. Okay, now I can kind of, I feel like, okay, well, because the day was so painful to pull out, come home, but I had no choice. There was so much pain for the last couple of days, it's ridiculous. And so I was like, I should do a show tonight. It's Thursday. And I got to jack the vehicle up tomorrow and spin the tires, see if I can figure out what the hell is squeaking. Because I don't want to do a bunch of damage, right? I got to find the problem. It's just enough to make me throw up just thinking about it. Hello? Hello? Hey, hang on. Hey, hang on there, Pinhead. Try it again. Just do that again.
Your sheep?
Do that
Hello,
again.
Mr. Dana. This is Yoshida Mashada, Tokyo Bureau. How are ya?
Tokyo Bureau of Assholes, is it?
Mr. Dana,
How
I see your scam
what color is your nose?
Mr. Dana, why you talk in irrelevancy?
What color is
We
your
all
nose?
know
Your
you're-
nuclear brown nose? How'd you ever get your nose out of the nuclear's ass long enough to call me?
Mr. Dana, it's red.
Yeah, I bet it
Yoshida
is.
Mashada with the red-nosed reindeer.
Did I see you here in Newfoundland? Hey,
Mr. Dana,
scumbag.
you're gonna be in
He's-
trouble. You keep
Hey,
scamming.
hey,
You know
scumbag.
scam?
Scumbag, did I see you in
Scam?
Newfoundland? Were you down here, scumbag?
Mr. Dana, we're looking at you. We're going to be investigating you
Yeah,
in
good.
a much more direct manner.
Oh, so
And you're
that's a
gonna
threat,
be
is
in
it?
deep trouble.
That's a threat, is it?
You know what?
You threatening me?
Yes. I am, definitely, because you're a big scammer. No, not a big scammer, a little scammer.
I provide all the documentation.
How much money you're getting these days from the scam victim? $10?
So,
$20?
so, tell me, are they really in Reactor 4? Scammer?
What you talking about?
Look at the screen.
What you talking about?
Look at the screen. They're stupid. Are they really in that building over there?
Mr. Dana, you don't know anything about anything. All you know is how to scam people with your sob story, all your lies, this insect dying. Do you think people so stupid?
I showed you the headlines, stupid. I'm not making anything up. I'm showing you the documentation.
Stupid
How am I
conspiracy.
making stuff up when I show you the documentation? They're stupid.
Everyone knows Fukushima was not what you say it is.
Yeah, well, why are they
You're
faking being in a building that don't exist?
You crazy bastard.
Anyway, I have to remember to block you.
How long you plan to keep
You're, he usually calls me 8 or 9, 10 times a show, right? I've been doing that for years, and I got sick of him. Well, you guys got sick of him. I never get sick of him. He's a real piece of work, that one. He's right now, he's going to go home and sodomize his puppies. After he sodomizes his children, of course. These are just despicable cowards. How dare you call me? How dare you imply that I'm not honest? You disgusting little parasite, you. You're despicable. But hey, the people in the comment section probably enjoyed that. Well, let me do a shout out for everybody, except for Peckerhead, who just called in, of course. And that's the end of the show. First off, all my research expeditions, I typically had provided the GPSs of everywhere I'm to, right? You go to my website, you'll find all that documentation. And so anybody can go out and debunk me if they really wanted to. Knock your socks off. Don't expect me to come along. I already been there. Fukushima is an extinction level event, right? Notice how Mr. Tokyo wouldn't answer the question. Why are they faking being in a building that don't exist? These are international models made by agencies worldwide depicting the radioactive fallout. We actually got the evidence, which I provide all the time. None of the things I say are my opinion. I provide the documentation for my assertions. So good night, everybody. God bless everybody. Hugs for everybody. Victor, Port Angeles, James Lucid, thank you for the call tonight, James. That was awesome. Darlene, I called Kevin. He didn't call me back. I'm sorry. Maritime Slave, Dana Nasana. And to answer the question of how much money did I make? I made $16. This is how much I raised for this trip I went on, sir. And I thank the 2 people that donated. That was awesome. We appreciate it. Peace Swear. Another Gmail. Patrick. Good night, everybody. Richard McCann. Stephen Young is out there somewhere, I'm sure. I don't stop working. I'm as honest. I'm one of the rare, completely honest people. I'm very open. I don't hide away from anybody. I always provide my name, my telephone number. My website is full of documentation. I don't have an opinion, I only have facts. I don't make stuff up, I provide the documentation for all of my assertions. To call me up and try to smear me is something he's done several thousand times, by the way. So that's why I was laughing when he called in. He's almost a part of the show in a terrible sense. Annie Archie. Good night, everybody. Hugs for everybody that's sitting back home watching. And watching this later and tomorrow or the next day or next year or next millennium. These videos will still be fun. John Curtis. Shane O'Brien. Good night, everybody. Angel's Place. And of course, I can't shout out people who are not in the comments, so hugs for all of you folks. Conrad, Felix. I'm exhausted. I haven't stopped for days. I haven't stopped for years and years in reality, but Sylvanus, Fourth. Just almost through it. Apologize for the poll tonight. I just wanted to have a few laughs. I thought it was pretty funny myself. Sometimes you got to lighten the mood, right? And I'll read the comments later. There you go. Nirad Yeloft. And how much fun did we have on the poll tonight? Everybody had a few chuckles. The idea of whether you voted or not, and I didn't really expect anybody to vote, was did you get a laugh when you first read it? Did you to find it funny? Did the bird flu kill Elvis? And the right answer, unfortunately, for the nuclear industry is no. And I don't know what to vote is my favorite. And the people that voted yes, all I can say was awesome. If you said yes, no, or I don't know, that was all awesome. That was the point of it. The idea was to get a laugh at it, get a giggle, a bit of a smile maybe. Because you never know, the bird flu could have killed Elvis. It's just a matter of time before somebody comes up with a study saying so. Don Vincent Walter. Did I get everybody? I think so. Let's call it a night. Yeah, let's call it a night. By all shapes and purposes, there's no way I should have got a live stream in the night. But I had to make myself feel like we accomplished something today, because coming home today was just brutal for me. It was the right thing to do, but for me it was brutal because it's so quiet out in the forest. It's just horrific. And I doubt if I'll sleep tonight. Because despite, these presentations, that's how I get rid of my frustration, is these presentations, come out and yell at the industry. That's why I let Tokyo shit for brains use the phone tonight, just so I can lash out at coward. You're going to investigate me for telling the truth, are you? We've done that before, didn't we? Been there, done that. The last thing I'm worried about is somebody investigating me, that's for sure. Good night, everybody. Have a great night, great day tomorrow. It is what it is. We'll be here Sunday, most likely. I'm probably not going to go out in the woods till after I see the doctor next week. And the boat will be fixed next week. The part for the boat was a little bit more expensive at the dealership. It was $435. I know I couldn't care less as long as we get it. I'm just thrilled, just incredibly grateful that we're having the opportunity to get out on the ocean and have a look for ourselves, right? Good night, everybody. We'll see everybody on the next show here. Take care, folks. Yeah, thanks, James. It was so. Yeah, awesome. And if you made it this far, folks, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. It probably won't show up, but it's appreciated. Have a great night, folks. We'll see everybody soon. Take care.